Recording is on.
Anita, General Hageman's going to be joining us in a little bit. He was just slightly off on something else, so he'll be joining us shortly. So I just talked to him, so he's good. Got to take care of my battle buddy. My new best buddy in the world, so I got to take care of him. So.
Okay, Vera, where are you? I've been trying to text her. But, Okay, Gusipora?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Come on, everybody. We want to start with the Lord's Prayer. I will pray with two languages. First, I will pray with Maori language, and the second one, I will pray with the English. We start. Eto mato matua etarangi. Kia tapu tau ingoa. Kia tae mai tau rangatira tanga. Kia mea tia tau e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua. Kia rite ano kito te rangi. Homai ki a matou aia nei. He taro matou mo tēnei rā. Murua o matou hara. Me matou hoki e muru nei. I o te hunga e hara ana ki a matou. Aua hoki matou e kawea. Kia whakawhaia. Engari whakaorangia matou i te kino. Nō hoki te rangatiratanga te kaha me te kororia ake. Amine. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Kia ora, aloha, welcome everyone from the United States, Belgium, New Zealand, Canada, Australia, Germany. Yes, Germany.
Almost there. He's almost there.
Okay. Yes, it is so great to connect with one another at this webinar. The presentation. Hello. Good morning here. How are you? General Hageman.
He's there.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry. Hold on a second.
Hello. Hello, Anita. Hello, everyone.
Yes, hi, Vera.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you, Vera.
Okay.
Okay. So today we will hear the presentation from outstanding, visionary, and influential women. We have Dr. Ratsi Borinska, a very sharp young scholar. Hi, Vera. And she will be facilitating the session. And we also have squadron leader Libby Reardon from Royal New Zealand Air Force. Thank you for coming. And we also have a retired general, Major Suzanne Vares-Lam, who will be speaking on the role of women in conflict prevention and resolution. Wow, I can't wait to hear. And also another panelist who is a retired general, and you certainly should listen to her, is Lieutenant General Christine Whitecross. Last but not least, we have Lima Ahmad, a young scholar from Tufts University who will be speaking about Afghan women at the center of political narrative. And we also have guests from France, Major Lauren Burrow. I hope I pronounced that correctly. From NATO X, and Dr. Travis Morris from Norwich University. If you have questions, please write your questions on the chat box, and your questions will be answered in the question and answer session, which is after the final speaker. Dr. Ratsiborinska, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita. Thank you for this engaging words, because it's always so nice to hear from you and to participate in your forums, because it's always engaging, always inspiring and motivating. So today we have a really important topic to discuss, because in Brussels we pay attention to many debates on women security, gender aspects, inclusiveness, and so on. And today it is really an important debate and important discussion for all of us to participate, to discuss, understand, and also to see what we can do as a security community, and also shape decision-making process for the future. So today we see that we have so many important speakers with us, and as Anita mentioned, we have the first presentation from Libby Reardon. Libby is currently the executive officer for the Royal New Zealand Air Force Base. She established the Pacific Defense Gender Network, and she is also pursuing her PhD through the University of the South Pacific, focused on how the women, peace and security agenda is being implemented across the region. She is also a mom of two young, active, smart girls, as I saw from the bio, and it is my pleasure to see Libby Reardon. So for your opening remarks. So please, Libby, if you're here, please, we are waiting for your remarks and for your opening remarks to start with this topic. Floor is yours.
Perfect, thank you. Kia ora tātou ngā Aotearoa, ko Libby toku whānau, ko Libby toku ingoa. Yeah, my name is Libby and I do come from Blenheim in the beautiful South Island of New Zealand. It's a real honour and a privilege to be here. I'm awed to share this virtual stage with such inspirational and influential women. We've had 100 years of feminist activism that's led to today, and we're now given the gift to contribute in a very small way. While we continue to advocate for more women leaders and inclusive spaces for decision making, the three guests we're about to listen to each provide evidence of the success we've achieved across both the defence and the political sectors. Their personal narrative provides a depth to the sometimes bewildering topic of women, peace and security. While WPS has foundations in both the Beijing Platform for Action of 1995 and the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 of the year 2000, it seeks for a transformation in the way that we've traditionally practiced security. Both agreements recognize the disproportionate impact that conflict and instability has had on women, children, and vulnerable populations, and it seeks to end this. The resulting agenda further looks to make space for women to participate as equal agents in all aspects of peace and security, across all levels and from all agencies. It's inspired by feminist advocacy, The WPS agenda was intended to address both the cause and effect of war, and in doing so, to address the power imbalance that has long tipped in favor of maintaining tradition and relying on patriarchal structures that were founded on a male perspective. Through embracing different ideas and making space for women at the decision-making table, we can look to fix the longer-term inequities that have contributed towards a fractured and conflict-prone world. While traditional conflicts were defined across state lines, we no longer can rely on our military capability to deter aggression, defend our borders, or remove the threat. In this era of COVID and increasing climate change disasters, the threats facing us cannot be overcome by weapons or restrained to our own national border boundaries. Instead, we're required to focus on human security and seek innovative and collaborative solutions to the modern threats facing our humanity and the world we live in. The stories from these women bring to life the challenges that they have faced in adjusting and transforming our security practices. They illustrate aspects of the 4 WPS pillars of prevention, participation, protection, and relief and recovery, and how they've used their own journey to encourage growth within the security and political domain. They each track a path of progress forward in this modern era where there's no longer a defining line between security of the state and of the population. It's only through the perseverance of individuals such as these 3 women that we can continue to see change occur, but we know there's still work to be done. It's because of their determination to challenge tradition and stand against the tide that we're increasingly gaining access and freedoms that were unthinkable in the past. Each are trailblazers in their own right and have each contributed to the health, wealth, and security of our shared humanity. While we've had the formal introductions, or about to, throughout Major General Varslum's career, she's highlighted the value of collaboration and connection. This connection extends to her advocacy of increasing cultural awareness across the spaces where we operate. Our individual understanding of other cultures can lead to a higher standard of real engagement. When we connect like this, we can have honest communication and the chance to identify shared solutions that may mitigate and prevent future conflict. Showing empathy, compassion, and connection is what brings us closer as human beings and removes the dividing lines that exist between and across populations. And to achieve this connection, we're seeking to transform our security domain from existing as a self-reliant silo to reach out to other organizations and to a wider dynamic of people. To embrace inclusion and diversity within organizations that once placed uniformity and conformity as the goal. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting her during an operational gender advisor course in Hawaii in April in 2019. This course left me so inspired, I became determined to pass on the knowledge somehow. And that opportunity arose in November later in that year, where again, the United States Indo-Pacific Command became instrumental in supporting the delivery of a similar course adapted to suit the Fiji context. We delivered this to a large group in Suva, and a spirit of collaboration and connection became the cornerstone of this course. We had instructors from Japan, from America, from Australia, and New Zealand, and we delivered it to students from the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, and the Republic of Fiji Military Forces. While understanding and applying a gendered perspective became the key takeaway point for these students, empathy and connection was a byproduct, and a lot of the friendships endure to this day. I haven't had the opportunity to meet Lieutenant General Whitecross herself, but her contributions towards Operation Honour remain valuable. The Canadian model provided the foundations for our own Operation Respect here in New Zealand. It has a similar intent to combat inappropriate sexual behaviour and protect our women, both those in uniform and those interacting from the outside. We know this to be a really important step if we're to create inclusive organisations. And so it's only through advocacy by leaders such as her that we will see this change from being a taboo topic to one that we can openly discuss and work together to eliminate. Lima Ahmad's contribution toward the influence of women in the security sector and her engagement with grassroots movements continues to this day. Such engagements are a key piece of the WPS puzzle and strategy for achieving sustainable peace, and an area that traditional military activities have long neglected. In the Pacific, it was these grassroots movements that succeeded in ending the conflict in Bougainville. They brokered a peace deal that officials and formal networks were not able to achieve. Grassroots movements in Fiji, too, were instrumental in reaching out to remote communities during the coups from the 1987 and have also become responsible in large-scale disaster responses. The Pacific Conference of Churches, led by Reverend James Bhagwan, has maintained a focus on inclusive dialogue, human rights, climate justice, and combating gender-based violence. And this has now been reflected in activities of the military, with their engagement with the Fiji Women's Crisis Center, their enthusiasm to embrace women, peace, and security awareness sessions across their force, establishing a committee, and their thirst for the Gender Advisor course. While human security remains at the forefront of WPS, the engagement of grassroots movements, establishing inclusive organizations, and the prioritizing of empathy, connection, and compassion and collaboration can all become vessels for greater implementation. With the hard task of institutionalizing WPS still largely ahead of us, I look forward to taking renewed enthusiasm and energy from the presentations and discussions that will occur today. And I hope that you will join me in welcoming these three inspirational and influential women to our virtual stage. I would love to be meeting you again in person. However, let's hope another time. I'll end with a Maori proverb, kia kaha, kia maia, kia manawa nui. Be strong, be brave, be steadfast. Thank you.
Fantastic, Louis. Thank you very much for that. An excellent introduction. Very good webinar. Thank you.
Still unmute.
Thank you so much for your wonderful remarks. It was really inspirational and motivating, and it was very, very nicely done, especially for all of us to hear you right now. So thank you so much. Right now we have another very important speaker with us. It's a retired General Suze Fares. She recently retired from the military after 34 years of service. It's amazing, 34 years of service. And right now, in the past years, she was working in support of many senior officials at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and she cultivated and maintained key relations among 36 nations within the Indo-Pacific region. It's amazing. Right now, she provides also consulting and advising on Indo-Pacific security issues, and it's really amazing to have you with all of us. So the floor is yours. I know that will be a very important topic discussed on the role of women in conflict prevention and resolution.
Thank you so much. Kia ora and aloha, everyone, from Honolulu, Hawaii. Mahalo nui loa, or thank you. To all the attendees and Dr. Abbott, the Board of Advisors, so honored to be here with these distinguished panelists. And Libby, wonderful to see you again. It's been many years, and thank you for your excellent remarks. As it was mentioned, you know, I've just recently retired after 34 years, in the past 5.5, working with amazing Anthony Spadaro at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. And yes, that deserves a round. You know, Indo-Pacific Command sounds like dolphin speak to some people. Really what that is really the largest and oldest geographic command. And, you know, I'd like to comment, if we can put up the slides. I don't know if you're able to push those out right now.
Yes, it works. Yep.
It's up. Good to go. Okay. So Um,
Yeah, it's good to go.
oh, we got some echo there. So I think we're good to go. Can you see it on your end? You can? Okay, good. So super. You know, I'm excited to talk about this issue on the role of women in conflict prevention and resolution. And there's a little picture there. You might see it. Actually, that's me there in my younger years in Balad, Iraq. I don't know if you can see that picture there. It was during Operation Iraqi Freedom 3. And that picture tells a story because you see, I've got two little girls surrounding me. And this wasn't uncommon. And many of you may understand that. When we would go out into the environment in Iraq or Afghanistan, you know, when there were most of the units that would go out were men. But when there was the rare case in which female engagement teams or women would go out, girls and women would take the opportunity to come up to you. And many of them came up to me, would approach me, touch me, kiss my face, and were eager to talk about their woes, the food, the water, healthcare. And children were often beaming, and not only because I had goodies to hand out to them, but girls were also amazed to see women. They realized upon coming closer, because oftentimes you couldn't tell by the way we were dressed until you came closer, then you realized that, you know, we were women, and they were anxious to talk. It's these kind of interactions that really, at the moment I didn't think about it, but years later, really realized that often we miss the gender lens when we're operating in different environments around the world. You know, or we get the perspective of the security environment wrong. And we can see in the recent events that maybe we haven't addressed some issues properly. And I wonder, and I'm really anxious to hear about our wonderful speaker about Afghanistan, where we've missed maybe some of the key indicators that potentially come from women. You know, the rich environment and information that's contained in engaging 50% of the population, I know we all know is very important. So early on, we have to be educated and understand, just as Libby had mentioned. You know, having you there, Libby, at that gender advisor course was key, as well as the many other women who were there as well. So I just share that picture was really the starting point where I really realized the role that women play in conflict prevention and resolution are key. And I want to, again, next slide, if you don't mind, focus some of my examples of the role of women in the Indo-Pacific region. And as I mentioned, if you should see a map there, and most people know this region, you know, for the Indo-Pacific Command, US forces that are in this region, it really extends to 50% of the Earth's surface. And there I am in the center of the Pacific. You can hardly see the islands, and you can hardly see the other Pacific Island nations, which really about 2,500 that dot that blue continent. It is so vast that you could fit all of the continents in this Pacific Island and add a few more. And in this region, we have the largest country, really, with the largest population, China, the largest democracy, India, and of course, 36 nations that we deal with, 14 time zones, the center of future boost in economic development, trade, and we all know this. Eyes are on the Indo-Asia Pacific region. At the same time, we know that there are significant challenges, and they're not only challenges from a U.S. perspective, where we talk about, you know, a rising China challenge or Russia and violent extremism, but really, as we all know, we live in this. Those of us who live in this region know that there are historical grievances, border and territorial conflicts that go way back, grudges from past events, religious conflict that exists. And at the center of that, of course, on top of all that, there are more natural disasters that occur in this area than any other place in the world, affecting the whole population, not just 50%, but the 100% of the population, and 50% are women. You know, and we know, and the UN has said it, that evolving threats disproportionately affect women and girls. And really, there is no more urgent time right now with COVID-19, especially, that there are opportunities to really improve the condition of women and involve them in decision making, in peace building and conflict prevention. The statistics are very clear. So I also want to, next slide, please. these pictures on here represent some of our images that evoke a lot of feeling and emotion. And, but I think all of you can identify with the fact that, UNICEF reported that the last 2 decades, we did see a halving of the number of girls, if you look at that top left picture, or girls at school. We were able, or collectively as a community that's reaching out to really change the statistic of 30 million girls out of school to 50 million. That's huge, half, right, over the last couple decades. But yet, as a result of COVID-19, now estimates that 1.2 million additional girls in the region are dropping out of school. But we're seeing that across the globe, not just this region. There's other responsibilities that they have: care at the home, increased family members who fall victim of the virus, and also many of them have to return home because of stalled migratory work. So the economic hardships are being realized most by women and girls in terms of education. Not to mention the fact that 2/3 of the poor in the Asia Pacific region rest with women and girls who are having to work. And other opportunities or unfortunate events that occur that impact security or trafficking persons. We've seen and heard dialogues on an increased number of that. As a result, lack of access to adequate health care, maternal mortality, sexual gender-based violence. We've seen a significant amount of that. And the other piece is that we know that the academic research shows us that the security of women and the security of the nation state are integrally linked with all of these measures, all of these pictures that you see: education, access to healthcare, access to food, access to a seat at the table. Those are a predictor of a state's peacefulness, not really wealth, democracy, identity, or how well you've trained a force to fight against another force. I mean, that's another conversation. But I wonder sometimes if we miss the mark in some places to not look at these indicators by asking women exactly how they perceive the security environment. Oftentimes, these are external sources that look at the security environment, make an assessment. We take a look at women as victims, but we don't ask them, how do you see the security environment? And that earlier picture I showed you, really, when you ask women, you get this floodgates open of feeling and emotion that tells you and shows you how they feel about the environment. So that's a great lesson learned as we look at what's going on right now. So next slide, please. So I wanted to share this picture, if you can see it, is a picture on the Arizona. I don't know if you recognize it, Todi, but in the very front are 2 key women leaders. We have Brigadier General Naralee McDonald, as well as Brigadier General Jen Short. They are 2 women leaders at Indo-Pacific Command. One is in a strategic position in our plans and policy, and the other as a vice of the intelligence section within Indo-Pacific Command. And behind them are a variety of leaders throughout this Indo-Asia Pacific region who came together this year from 20 different countries with General Lori Robinson. And if she was the first woman to ever lead all of our Pacific forces within the Indo-Pacific Command, as well as be the Northern Command commander. That meant she was responsible for all the protection of the United States, the continental United States. So that's pretty significant. As well as the Pacific Air Force's commander, General Wilsbach, he also led in the front of this Women, Peace, and Security forum that occurred. And really, it was to discuss what we're discussing today, the role of women, not just in defense, but the role of women to be able to engage civil society for conflict prevention and resolution in all phases and sectors. We've said it before, and we know this, that women's participation is a predictor of peace. The status of women in the world today shows that, women are more empowered in different spheres of life, but yet in communities. So, for example, we're seeing, more women as Women, Peace, and Security is moving forward as part of these dialogues or given different positions of responsibility. We see Japan changing with Abe's Womenomics. We see, as I've gone throughout the region in the world, wherever I did bilateral dialogues and represented the United States, it was interesting that a lot of these military leaders saw that they needed to bring up and mentor women, which was very exciting. You know, I think more and more in this region, people are realizing that really gender equality is a better indicator of states' peacefulness. Gender equality really is a predictor of armed conflicts in a number of studies. And also the relationship between decision-making power with regard to peace and conflict is pretty clear. The other thing that the inclusion of women does is it helps, women can moderate extremism. And I have an example a little bit later to talk about what happened in the Philippines, and some of you may be familiar with that. But really, that studies have documented that when it comes to preventing violent extremism, there are cases of women in civil society adopting effective nonviolent approaches based really on cooperation, trust, and access to communities. And we see this in Myanmar right now with the overthrow of the civilian government, the peaceful protests that women are involved in, making their voices heard in what's happening there. And also, when women serve in police and military forces, they have access, as I mentioned earlier, to half of the population that really would be closed off to men in conservative cultures. Women are more likely to report gender-based violence to these officers. As I mentioned in that picture earlier, just a floodgate of people would come to me. And if they had an opportunity to share, they would, and they would not go to the men to share that information. The other thing, inclusion of women, is that women do strengthen peacemaking because they are victims disproportionately of violence and conflict. They know the cost of conflict. I think they feel it in a different way. And I think we need to hear that. And the statistics show us that 50% of peace agreements break down within 5 years when we don't include women. And when we don't have women participate, 64% are more likely to fail. And when we include women, there's higher rates of implementation. And I cite the Philippines that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Also, statistics show that the greatest impact long-term, that agreement is 35% more likely to last at least 5 years longer if women participate in its creation. The other reason why we need to include women is that women bridge divides and mobilize coalitions. So we've seen that, as I mentioned, in Myanmar, Burma, where they are looking across a diverse group. Women are more willing to do that according to studies, to look at different ethnic, religious, political, cultural divides and bring that to the forefront. The other reason why we should, of course, include women is that women raise the issues that are vital for the peace process. So if we just think that when we enter an environment that it's the strength of the M or the military part elements of a whole of government society, and it's not the diplomatic, information, the economic piece, healthcare, all of the other issues that impact a whole society, women are more likely to bring up those issues that sometimes are not thought about. And I wonder how that's going to pan out as we look at Afghanistan today, about what we did not look at. Also, women prioritize gender equality, sometimes in a group, and just speaking from my own experience, being a 10% of women general officers that serve in the U.S. Armed Forces, that sometimes we do come up with a different perspective, and it's very much appreciated by my male colleagues who often say, wow, I didn't think about that. So we're coming in as a mother, as a wife, as a woman who has to think about other family members. We find ourselves taking on the brunt of those pieces. Having that perspective and sharing it can help us to really look at how we engage in the peace process. So as a result of that, I think the inclusivity also extends to the military. That's why having women as peacekeepers, the UN has made some wonderful goals. They have proven that by the presence of women in U.S. peacekeeping forces, and by the way, the Indo-Pacific region, we have a huge majority of the countries in this region provide peacekeeping forces around the globe. They are a significant contributor. And as a result, we find ourselves training with them. This is a goal that many of the countries in this region have not met yet, is the UN goal of having the 20% women as part of their peacekeeping force. But Bangladesh is another country I'll talk about. They've been very successful, and I think we can learn from them. And we should have these women as peacekeepers because we know that there's improved operations and performance. We have better access. They reflect the communities we serve. When we go into a place, it's not all men, but yet we send all men sometimes. It doesn't make sense. If we go into a place and we want access to not only intelligence, while I'm an intelligence officer, it's really the information that gives us the understanding, then it should be proportional about how we distribute who gets sent. And they need to be sent in they're trained. Our lack, just a side story, our lack of really understanding when we first went into Iraq and Afghanistan, not doing a thorough assessment of the environment and understanding that men do not have access to the women, required us to, at the last minute, create female engagement teams out of, let's see, Libby, you're a truck driver. I know you're not a truck driver. You're a truck driver, so what the heck? You're a woman. You're going to go with the infantry and you're going to do cordon and search. Not trained, did not understand, but hey, you're a woman, so you can engage. So we didn't even think about investing in that training. So the inclusion of women early, so that we understand the community we serve, not only helps secure our own forces, but it builds trust and confidence in the people in whom we're serving. And I got an example to talk about that in a minute. Also, in inserting women as part of the larger force really helps to reduce conflict and confrontation. Believe it or not, they are looking at the faces, just like those girls. They identified that, this is someone I can run to. They did not run up to the men because the consequences of what would happen to women approaching men in those kind of societies where it's unacceptable for them to have any kind of dialogue with men. But if we knew that up front, we would have planned for it up front. Next slide, Kama. Thank you. So this is a picture of after a women's roundtable with Ambassador Bernadette and myself. I don't know if you can, where's Waldo, if you can see me in there. But Ambassador Bernadette was the ambassador at the time I did the bilateral dialogue with Bangladesh. And I was the U.S. representative and the first female U.S. representative. And around me are women from all the different forces of Bangladesh who were part of peacekeeping operations. Now, Bangladesh has provided peacekeepers for over 30 years, one of the longest standing annual contributors to the UN. And they have actually met the goal of the number of UN peacekeepers. As of 2020, there have been more than 1,400 women who were deployed. And I keep in contact with some of these women. And one was so excited because she was going as part of the all-female Bangladeshi force that went out there. And when I got a chance to do this roundtable and talk to these women, they were so excited, number one, to see a female general officer. But now I'm happy to report that Bangladesh has had a major general promoted in their armed forces, which is wonderful. But many of these women are engineers, doctors, lawyers, highly qualified. And when they went to different parts of Mali or the Congo, young girls would come up to them and say, "Oh, are you here to cook the food for the men?" And they said, "No, actually, I'm here to design a new community for you where you'd be safe and you'd have access to your own wash facilities and protection." And they were so excited. And it was wonderful to see the faces of these young women officers who were excited about contributing and seeing that when they insert themselves in these places, there was a sense of peace that overcame the villages, because when a force comes in with their women, you send a different message. And I don't think that's something we think about enough. And the other piece about Bangladesh I wanted to mention when I met with the ambassador and spoke with USAID, spoke with the different leaders there, is that You know, in 2017, when we saw the military offensive on the Rakhine State and the Myanmar moving over to the border, Bangladesh opened their arms. Over about 1 million Rohingya refugees live in Cox's Bazar. So the potential there, where over half are women and girls, for all kinds of sexual violence, unrest, trauma, to name a whole host of problems that could occur. Bangladesh is using a women, peace, and security perspective to address some of these needs. And it's really many women in the community who are highlighting security risks for women, which I think is phenomenal. So I think Bangladesh, I've brought it up enough. I'm really proud of where they've gone, looking outwards, and I know they're looking inwards as well in their own civil society. So thank you so much, Kama. If we could go to the next slide for the Philippines. So this slide here, you should see it. You see a whole unit called the Civil Relations Company that were really dispatched to Marari. So if you're familiar, in 2017, ISIS Philippines began fighting, and you know, myself and Tony were at Indo-PACOM arena when a lot of this was breaking out, and it was significant. A city where 75% of the people were displaced. And if you look at pictures today, they're still recovering from, you know, living in shelters, thankfully provided by the UN. Filipino women played really a critical role in responding to this crisis, because the Philippines has a national action plan. They've done 3 iterations of it, and they have some awesome leaders within the government and in their military who realize that you need to engage the women in a population. So this all-female picture that you see here, Civil Relations Company, deployed, and they were assisting in the rehabilitation and recovery programs for internally displaced persons. So the company was organized, trained, and developed a mission and a culture of peace, really to try to reach out to the children, the women, and the youth for peace building. Because the potential for displaced youth, especially young men, to become fighters themselves is an issue in a place where you are struggling for the basic human needs and rights. So this, of course, other women-led societies, organizations also came to the table, not just the military, together to help to the healing of trauma by women, and understanding that the role that women and mothers have in influencing their sons and daughters for future peace conversations. And the other piece that we saw success stories in the Philippines in conflict prevention and resolution was, I think it's often quoted a lot, but I think it's worth always looking at, is the 2014 peace agreement between the government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. You know, for 40 years, armed conflict, and there's still that tension there. So the constant role of women in that simmering conflict over the 40 years between the government and the Philippines and the Moro rebel factions who want to establish an independent Muslim majority Mindanao, you know, really has caused an estimated, they say, you know, 100,000 deaths, 3.5 million people displaced. So 40 years, a whole generation of conflict and no peace. So many of the women were part of this. And this was led by Miriam Coronel Ferrer, who really led the government's team. She's the first female chief negotiator to sign a major peace accord. Also, when we look back at the statistics, what made this successful is that women served at least 22% of the negotiators, which is much more than we see in many places. And also women represented about 27% of the total signatories to the final agreement, and were advisors to the government as well as the Moro Islamic Liberation Front teams. And women were part of the Peace Process Advisory Council to the President, and I was able to meet one of the key leaders at our Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, and she was one of the designers. And what she learned here was through that education from the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. So again, going back to that education and training being key. I want to leave quickly on that note on the Philippines with a quote that I think is important by Miriam Coronel Ferreira, who is the government chief negotiator. She said, you can't really have a perfect agreement, but you can make an agreement more imperfect if you don't have women's perspectives in that agreement, or if you don't have their interests and welfare also at the back of your mind as you negotiate all the different components, the political, social, the economic, and cultural. I thought that was such an apt quote, which leads me to the other piece that Libby was talking about. Next slide, is the whole piece on education and training. So there's our picture. Can you find Libby in that picture? Do you see yourself? I see you looking there, Libby. So that was our first U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Gender Advisor course. Happy. It was wonderful to have an international group come to this, because we were actually, as you know, Libby, in the U.S., when we designed this joint gender advisor course that is used now by our Office of Secretary of Defense, a lot of those contributions were made by New Zealand and Australia. We got a lot of the insights on how you all do women, peace, and security to help shape how we do it and inform it. So thank you very much. Really, implementation of women, peace, and security and training is key, as Libby had mentioned. Within the U.S. in itself, while we had a national action plan in 2011, it really didn't take till 2017 where this has made history. The U.S. president signed Women, Peace, and Security Act into law. And now Congress has allocated money against it. Because what you believe in, if you believe in education and training, and you believe that this prevents conflict and helps with the resolution of conflict, then shouldn't you put your resources against where you believe is effective? So this is significant, to put money against conflict prevention and resolution, as well as the integration of women in defense. So in 2019, we had a U.S. government women, peace, and security strategy that not only affected defense, but also all the sectors, the State Department, Homeland Security, USAID, other elements of the nation that reach out to help with stability and conflict prevention. And then just last year, while we were in COVID, it didn't have much press, I think, because of COVID. But again, we had the second strategic framework and defense implementation plan that was put out by the Office of Secretary of Defense for the U.S. government. And this requires us to increase the number of gender advisors that we have, having a gender perspective in all of our operations, which I think is key. Next slide, please. So what next? Education and training. I think these are some examples in this picture of women advancing peace and security. But I actually should change that marker. It should advancing peace and security, because women alone cannot do this. Advance conflict prevention and resolution. It has to be all of humanity. It's not a women's issue, it's a human issue. And if you look at, around the region, we see that whether it's Japan, Malaysia, Bangladesh, Timor-Leste, Mongolia that I've engaged in, I really had a distinct opportunity to work with male counterparts in these countries to share the importance and role that women play in preventing conflict. And people acknowledge it, and some people just give surface verbiage to it and acknowledgement. But when you, like I mentioned, if you don't put resources and actual programs and actions, then it really is just a tagline of advancing peace and security. So our male leaders have to be part of that voice, and we need to put resources against it. And here are some examples in this picture of some actual action. So in the top middle, you see this is actually from the Human Capital Summit during what we call the Rim of the Pacific, which is the largest maritime international exercise in the world. And it happens every other year here at Pearl Harbor and off the Hawaiian waters. Countries throughout, amazing. Well, this Human Capital Summit brought in all of these, many of the representatives coming are male, to talk about human capital, and 50% of that being women, So we talked about women, peace, and security. And so you see that collection of teams there. It's not just women, but who are leaders to talk about women, peace, and security. Then you see another picture there where I'm looking at actually the first general office. She's the Director General of the Red Cross for Mongolia. And she actually held a forum for women leaders and their role in advancing actually crisis prevention. It was during a Golby Wolf exercise. And as you know, many natural disasters that occur in Mongolia, particularly, so it requires the whole of society to be involved. And that includes women. Women have taken on a significant amount of leadership roles. And then you see another picture there in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, where they held their first ever Women in Defense and invited Canada, Australia, and the US to talk about how we integrate women, peace, and security. So these are awesome examples of how we are advancing women, peace, and security. So, Kama, next slide, please. So I want to end with a mahalo nui loa to all of you, and thank you for taking the time to listen to me speak. And this is the last picture. You'll see that's also from Iraq. Women came out. I was the only woman on this patrol. I was out there joining my human intelligence team. I'd go out there periodically. And as soon as I came out, these two women came out, tried to yank me to go into their kitchen to see the inner sanctum of their home. And I said, oh no, I can't go in there. But, and the kisses that they gave me were pretty intense, like on each cheek, I love it, understanding the culture. But that was, again, another example and reminder. And I know that each and every one of you have wonderful stories. And I look forward to someday being able to chat with you over coffee or tea or an adult beverage to talk about your experiences. I think we need to keep this conversation going. So thank you, Dr. Abbott. Thank you to the board. Care about this issue. So very important. So mahalo nui loa. And aloha.
Thank you so much for this engaging talk. Very, very much appreciated, especially case studies that you brought into perspective, solutions about education and training, and how we need to engage women in all peace building and in general in all security aspects. Thank you so much for this talk. I turn over to next speaker. So we have a very important guest, and that is my privilege and honor to introduce the speaker. So I recently retired from military service after more than 38 years, Lieutenant General Chris Whitecross. It was my privilege to know you in NATO Defense College. You were the commandant for many years, true leader, very inspirational leader, and you also did a lot for all of us as a mentor. And it is very, very important for all women to have such a mentor. So I turn floor to you. So please, floor is yours. Do we have Chris Whitecross with us?
Yeah, she's here, but she needs to unmute.
Chris, please activate your mic. Your mic is switched off still. No?
Maybe mic is not activated.
Chris, can you activate your mic?
So there's a mute button with a mic sign. So if you click on it or you uncheck it. No, we can't hear you. Oh yeah, perfect. She can go out and come in again.
Okay, just allow me to say, Susie, thank you. That was fascinating and inspiring what you said. And I think, Vera, you will agree that we come back later to what has been said, because we could add some special remarks, some own experience, what you just brought forward, and probably to differ a little bit between high intensity warfare, conflict prevention, crisis management, and stuff like that. That would be quite useful. But in any case, this was really, really highly impressive, and thank you for that. This is exactly what we expected to hear from you. I apologize, but that was exactly what we wanted to hear. Great, thank you very much for that, Susie. Excellent.
Like I said, one of the most valued teammates I've ever encountered in a lifetime. I learned more from General Vera Slum than, I mean, it was literally going to school every time, you know, and again, too, it was the accessibility and literally Indo-PACOM, just we benefited from the leadership. And it was transformative leadership that General Vera Slum always demonstrated. And that's the key that we've talked about many times with what we're trying to accomplish with APSI is transformative change in leadership. So, man, I could listen all day.
So given the fact that we have obviously still a couple of
General Whitecross keeps jumping in, yeah. Uncheck the mic.
No,
okay, there's video. We just need to uncheck the mic. The tab down below.
Sometimes we have these technical issues, but what is important that we are all connected, and I think that they should be solved, these technical aspects. The most important is that we are here and all motivated to discuss this topic. So that that is essential. And of course, there will be many questions afterwards. So I expect from everyone to engage in debate afterwards, to have questions.
While we're waiting, Libby, you posed a great question. I think that was right after General Vera Slum's proposal. Do we want to sit there and maybe get an answer in now, or?
I'm happy to take that, Tony, if that's okay. You know, you know, thanks, Libby, for bringing that up. I think when we did several events, having key leaders like even Tony speak or General Hagman speak, it does take, I mean, when they are up there speaking for women, and how important it is, not because it's a women's issue. And I think, Libby, we need to be real here that people shy away from the word women, peace, and security. When you're talking about gender, then it's not so much. But that's an interesting psychological phenomenon itself, right? Why do we inch away from that word woman? Is it because, you know, sometimes perhaps we've associated with some, you know, wild early 1960s, especially in the West, of what that might mean, right? And yet not see that the security of women is all of our security, and it is a super measure. But I think it takes talking one-on-one. I even had a great conversation yesterday, which somebody asked me, a man, experienced officer, said, so what is this women, peace, and security thing? And when they hear it, they think it's a sexual harassment, sexual assault kind of program. And they don't realize when I explain the scenarios that I put forth to you today in the speech, then it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So it goes back to education, and it goes back to having more voices that don't just look like you and I, Libby. They have to look like the, the Tonys or the Gert. You have to have those faces out there. So as Admiral Harris, Admiral Davidson, Admiral Aquilino, these are the commanders of this huge, the largest geographical command for the United States. And they usually enter all of these women, peace, and security events that we held. They were the first ones to speak because they are in the power position to do so. And it makes a tremendous impact when they do so. So I think we have to continue to engage, and it's forums like this that help advance that.
Or even remember the most incredible fact. I mean, when we're talking even population density, that, when I learned this from General Vera Slum, would you ever make a decision without 50% of the population's input? So even when you look purely from a military intellectual exercise, would the commander make a decision without 50% of the input? No commander worth their salt would do that. So that's the other thing that we need to do with this education. And it's people champion this idea, not because it's just the cool thing to do right now. It's, again, would you make a decision without 50% of the input factor? I think, okay, we see.
I would like to jump in with some further remarks, if I may. Coming back to Afghanistan, you mentioned Afghanistan a couple of times, and given the recent pictures we still have in front of our eyes, and we remember what happened during the evacuation phase, and again the United States forces suffered a lot with our 13 comrades fallen. But coming back to Afghanistan, that means that one of our key sentences in Asia Pacific Security Innovation Forum is know more and understand better. Know more and understand better. But how can we understand a society like Afghanistan or Iraq or Somalia or anywhere else if we do not have access to at least 50% of the population? As Sergeant Major Anthony just said before, it is pretty difficult. In 2011, we started with the female engagement teams in Afghanistan. I remember well that most of my fellow male comrades really didn't understand what it was about. And as you said earlier, many of them thought, well, it's about sexual harassment, it's about treatment, it's about I don't know what. No, it's much more. It is understand better the society by getting in touch with 50% of the population, with the female population, and we did not have any access to them. So we even didn't know how the family works, how the inner circle is organized, where the power center fits, and things like that. So we had no clue, honestly. We were moving around in body gear, and this was one of the key problems at that time in 2011 and later then, was the full individual protection. Because people in the villages, they had no chance to identify whether this was a male soldier or a female soldier. It was pretty difficult for them to address a female one because it was not identifiable. So we tried to get away with this, let's say 100% protection, to lift off some stuff, to get off the glasses, the helmet, and to show, well, there are female individuals with us, and they want to approach the ladies of the village and the children, and as you said earlier, this was pretty difficult. It works in an environment where we do not have high intensity activities. So it is either before after or beyond this level of war fighting, but since the majority of time is not high intensity war fighting in any operational area, it is very, very useful to put a lot of effort and a lot of energy into this female engagement team approach, into, let's say, at least the attempt to take advantage of the presence of our female comrades to get more access to the various societies. So this is our experience, 2010, 11 until 2015, when I finally left Afghanistan, and I must say we should have started far more earlier with that. Thank you.
General Hagemann raises a phenomenal point when you start talking about low intensity conflict, but particularly let's look at the Indo-Pacific, and General Vereslam alluded to this, is that when you also talk about most of the natural disasters that occur in the globe occur in the Indo-Pacific area. And so when you're talking low intensity, so you're talking humanitarian assistance, disaster relief operations, how many times when an all male led team, forgot, as General Vereslam taught me a long time ago, 5 years ago, when you don't have women there, you forget about nappies, you forget about babies, you forget about what's critical, you forget about that the men are leaving the village and people can't swim and women can't swim. We're not doing this, but we can't think that or perceive that. And again, to the point, if we're going to gain stronger footholds in low intensity conflict, particularly in this hotbed area of humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, in the most consequential area of operations in the world, we've made mistakes. And how do we rectify that?
Thanks for that. If I could just jump on there, since we still do have time, we don't have sound yet with Chris yet. If it's okay, I wanted to, thanks for those comments, spot on. And I wanted to mention what General Hagemann had mentioned about not identifying women. It was interesting in Iraq when I was there during OIF 3, is that the other insurgent groups would take pictures and show women searching other women. But these are women soldiers, but because their hair, and then they would take the bun that you could see under the helmet, and then they would Photoshop it out to make it look like men were searching. So we had to make some adjustments, and if they had long hair, put their hair down, under the helmet, so that they couldn't Photoshop out the picture to incite anger. Look at what the Western men are doing and molesting our women, when we actually made a conscious effort to have women on the search lines. So those are some of the things that we don't think about on exploitation. And what Anthony said about going back to Bangladesh, there were some wonderful things done because it's flood prone. Men often leave the villages and work in the city, so women are alone. So when there's a natural disaster, they're often victims. But what they did was a special effort to, USAID and other NGOs going in there to train the women, including Red Cross, to be Red Cross certified, to lead the community in an evacuation, have women be the leaders because they're the ones left behind. And so that they're not victims, they're victors. They're able to take and galvanize the community, and we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to distribute aid, and women being a part of even food distribution in places where often they're ambushed and it's taken away. We have to think about the security from the point of distribution to the place in which the food is distributed to families, and wonder, sometimes we distribute aid and all these men come and it ends up in the black market, and we've all seen that. And so that's understanding the operational environment. But you're right on this, so many natural disasters and so many considerations. And even exercises that we do, exercises meaning we practice how we respond to these natural disasters, practice how we respond to conflict. It needs to include this kind of training. And we've had that before where when we, as the military part of the whole of government, don't do anything to respond, it just gets worse. You turn up the dial on the exercise. They're not responding. We're going to now make this 1 million displaced civilians gender-based violence and see if they're going to do anything about it. And oftentimes gender-based violence is ignored. And if we think gender-based violence doesn't have a security nexus, try and talk 75 years later with some countries at the table. What gets thrown out there? Violence against women during World War II. And I'm not going to call out countries. I think you know what I'm talking about, but it is still an issue. It's a security issue. So if we ignore it, it's going to continue to hamper security efforts.
It's part of war fighting in certain to a certain extent. If you take as an example Second World War, what happened in May and the following months, 45 in Berlin, it was done by purpose. So this was a means to suppress population, to intimidate them. And to show and to demonstrate, well, we are the victors. We are the ones who say left or right or straight forward or whatever. So this is just an example, and it happens until today because it's a weapon. How to treat women is still a weapon. Because it has to do with perception, it has to do with personal experience. Intimidation and all that. It's honestly it's a shame. And the recent reports from Guinea when we had the Ebola crisis.
On mute, they can hear you now.
Can they?
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
The question is how female population was treated by official, UN official. Seems to prove again the bestiality which sits within mankind, especially within men, if they feel powerful enough to do whatever they deem useful for them. So it's a shame, and there we have to fight against. That's the point. Oh, I see Chris, and I can hear something.
A little bit of movement. So, are we okay for me to go, or shall we carry on with the discussion?
We are waiting for you, Chris. We were waiting for you for some minutes. So yes, please go ahead.
Well, first of all, my sincerest apologies. I had no idea what was going on, but the wonderful IT tech walked me through. Anyways, long story. But we're all sorted out. So good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I don't know where you are in the world. Here it's almost supper time or dinner time. But I just wanted to thank Dr. Anita Abbott for inviting me to speak to this forum. Though those of you who know Anita know that it takes very little for you. It's very difficult to say no to her. So not that I had much choice to be speaking here tonight or today. And I really would have liked to been there physically rather than only spiritually and virtually. But such is life in 2021. I won't have any great pictures, so I'm hoping I can at least garner your attention for the next couple of minutes. I was really intrigued by the previous speaker, and I think some of our commentary may overlap a bit. So I think that's just great supporting fires. So we'll see how that goes. So Anita actually asked me to speak about women in peace and security about 6 months ago, and she said I could speak about whatever I wanted, as long as it's somehow related to the topic. So I gave it a bit of a thought, and what I thought I would do was share with you some of the reasons why I was so proud to be a member of the military of my nation, as a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, and hope really to articulate why I think these reasons are increasingly important in our unpredictable world of today in terms of security, defense, and preserving our democratic values. As you probably saw from my bio, if you got to see it, I've recently retired from the military after having served more than 38 years. I joined when I was 19, so I pretty much grew up in the military, and I've had the pleasure to visit more than 76 countries around the world. I've done some really interesting and fascinating things, and been part of some really great innovative thinking. On the flip side, I've also done some difficult and challenging things, both personally and professionally. I've lived in 5 countries, including Germany, Croatia, Afghanistan, and Italy, and met some pretty incredible people and some not so incredible people. Throughout it all, in my 38 years plus service, I've learned that whether or not I didn't know the issues that were at play, the one thing I could always rely on, that one constant that many of us look to, is that we as professional military are respected and we're relied on to get the job done and to do it well, honorably, while respecting our values. This, I believe, is a legacy and one that I am absolutely personally immensely proud. When I first joined the Canadian Armed Forces back in 1982, now I'm dating myself, the Canadian military engineers were having this thing called the Get Well program, aimed at increasing their numbers. And coincidentally, the engineers had just recently opened their recruitment to women. I was in engineering in the university, and I had no idea how this was going to work out, but I naively signed on the dotted line, like many of us do, I think, not knowing where this decision would lead me. Now, I thought engineering at Queen's University was hard, but my first moments at the Canadian Forces School of Military Engineering made me wonder, what was I getting into? It was difficult both mentally and physically. Let's face it, being 5'2" on a really good day, depending on my hair, and a lot lighter those days, weren't great enablers when you were part of a group assembling a heavy steel girder bridge as a member of the top panel party or in laying out minefields. But tenacity, humble work ethics, and a tremendous sense of teamwork by us all worked in our favor to set us all up for success. These traits may have started for me in the training sites of Chilliwack, British Columbia, but they are truly hallmarks for militaries around the world. And that's certainly my experience. Speed ahead a few years to my time in UNPERFORM in the former Republic of Yugoslavia, or as a part of ISAF in Afghanistan, where that same sense of duty and teamwork were prevalent. I will admit I may have been a bit of an anomaly, though I wouldn't have characterized it that way back then. The reality was my military and civilian colleagues welcomed me as a valued member of the team. Though there were moments when I felt the odd man out, probably a poor choice of words here, I never thought that I was being set up for failure. And whether in our Canadian Arctic or while deployed or in command positions, I felt that I was accepted for who I was and what I brought to the team. The reality, of course, as I have come to understand while traveling and working in more multinational environments, is this is not always the case. And this, I believe, is our strength, diversity. And by this word, I mean that each individual is unique and recognized for their individual differences of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, religion, and others. This diversity comes in many dimensions. And through these differences, through our strengths and weaknesses, we form stronger, better teams that think more critically, more comprehensively, and more innovatively than homogeneous groups can ever do. So why am I telling you this, and what has it got to do with security and defense? Well, I believe that this simple act of inclusiveness will help us positively influence our role in the future security environment, ensuring a robust security and defense posture that is essential to the preservation of democratic values and principles. And I submit it's more important now than ever before. I wouldn't be here today, standing virtually in front of you 38 years after I joined the Canadian Armed Forces, had many of my peers, superiors, even subordinates, especially our non-commissioned members, not taken time to be inclusive with me to ensure that I was part of the team. Leading in an environment that embraces our differences and encourages new ways of thinking, inspires trust, dedication, loyalty, and excellence. Fred Max, a successful business leader and author, has been quoted as saying, "The ultimate leader is one who is willing to develop troops to the point that they surpass him or her in knowledge and ability." And I believe that if we make our people feel indispensable, they will function at a level that is indispensable to our success. And they will bring their best effort to work every day. Creating a diverse team built between the pillars of trust and motivation, where people are allowed to take risks and to come up with better ways of doing business, are critical to addressing the defense and security challenges of today and in the future. Leaders in any environment are expected to adjust to change. Military and defense leaders must evolve in response to the ever-changing security environment, to develop better and more responsive tactics, techniques, and processes, so we meet the enemy at our advantage. There is another responsibility that we as leaders are also expected to take on, and that is a better understanding and more comprehensive look at what I would call the human dimension of leadership. We need to better understand what makes our fighting force or our corporate or business or academic teams stronger within, more personally resilient, and more effective as a team. We need to keep this human aspect in mind as a means of validating what we do and to remind us that it matters. It has always mattered, as leaders in this audience know well. Considering the new generations joining our armed forces or any other security-related organizations, such as police forces or intelligence services, it matters even more in today's world. Our focus must continue to be on our people. We used to say in the Canadian Armed Forces, mission first, people always. And now we say people first, mission always. Because as military leaders, it's actually in our DNA to keep a focus on achieving the mission. But we need to ensure that we take the needs of our people into consideration. Training, education, the right environment, and tactics, they go a long way to achieve the same. We all know this. But I would suggest this same amount, or more important, needs to be put on how we treat our people, how we ensure that they can rise to the next level, both as individuals and as teams. These are the organizational issues that require our attention, because we are ultimately responsible for creating the environment where people not only function, but thrive, and know they will be respected for bringing their best skills and attributes forward. We cannot optimize anyone's performance in an environment where they feel personally diminished or powerless. We cannot tolerate behavior in our organizations that lowers people's personal value and thereby lowers our own institutional values, principles, reputations, and potential. Over and above that, we have to be honest and not just tell our subordinates what to do. We ourselves have to do it and insist those around us behave with the same level of integrity. We have to take on this responsibility both in and out of uniform and in and out of our boardrooms. We have to understand that we need more diversity in our ranks, and we further need to understand that in order to attract quality, we must demonstrate quality. Our institutional culture must be one where respect for diversity, going well beyond the rhetoric, is amongst our core values, much as service before self. Leaders from our most junior to our most senior ranks must truly believe that what we are stating loudly is critical to operational effectiveness and to sustaining our forces. Security, defense, and democracy are tangibly linked to how we demonstrate we care and respect those around us. So much of the world is changing, and we need a stabilizing agent. When crisis strikes, our teams will look to us for a way forward, to lead them, to guide them, maybe even to comfort them. In the military context, risk and instability are something we face all the time. But even that's changing. It's not so easy to tell friend from foe, and the nature of war fighting has evolved. It's less about boots on the ground and more about controlling the information space and successfully controlling the narrative. Fake news, disinformation, and weaponized narratives have permeated today's chaotic information environment and will require leadership to ensure these threats to our democratic principles do not take hold. We need leaders who can motivate and guide people to keep state and non-state actors at bay, who thrive on destabilizing our nation's institutional apparatus and foster fear and chaos amongst the civilian population. And this adversary doesn't just attack our institutions. This adversary is also looking for inside information and will take it from us without our permission. They make their approach via our networks, digital and human, and these two are interdependent, and uses our own tools against us and leveraging it for nefarious influence. Now more than ever, it's about trust and values. Now more than ever, even as we embrace more and more on technology, we rely on our people to do the right thing, to hold up the high standard of integrity and ethics, and to be guided by loyalty. And we know that successful organizations benefit from having the input from a wide scope of perspectives. We understand that diversity around the table contributes to better ideas. Policy, program development, operations, public consultation, services, and working conditions. We need only look at the examples of deployments in Afghanistan, where we had men and women combat team leaders. The women were the only ones who could speak and garner intelligence from the local women in a village. The same went for people who spoke the local languages and could therefore communicate with the local militia and others. This diversity was a formidable enabler to our missions. There is value in how diversity plays a role in executing successful operations. Diverse and inclusive teams, whether in the military or on the boardroom, equate to better decisions, solutions, and outcomes. I believe we have a key role in ensuring the makeup of our teams provides for as much diversity as possible. And in turn, this diversity will ensure our safety and security as a nation. There are many ways to inculcate these values. Our foreign and defense policies must acknowledge and address any potential impacts of policies, programs, services, and other initiatives on diverse groups of men and women, taking into account gender and other identity factors. And this goes beyond gender, which in and of itself is no longer binary, and includes the examination of a range of other intersecting identity factors, such as age, education, language, geography, culture, and income. How do our national policies influence or affect marginalized groups? For militaries, having gender advisors who are trained to seek out the issues and solutions in the operational planning process are essential in winning the hearts and minds on operations and in securing safety and projecting stability in any environment. There is mounting evidence that women's participation in peace and security efforts contributes to more effective responses to today's complex crisis. And women play a critical but underutilized role in preventing conflict and sustaining peace. At the same time, sexual and gender-based violence in conflict is widespread, and women continue to be marginalized in peace and security processes. In this context, the Women in Peace and Security agenda, with its focus on women's participation, security, and empowerment in global efforts to prevent and resolve conflicts, remains a critical tool to build more peaceful and inclusive societies. When women are included in peace processes, as was already stated, there is a 20% increase in the probability of an agreement lasting at least 2 years, and a 35% increase in the probability of an agreement lasting at least 15 years. Indeed, research led by Valerie Hudson suggests that gender equality is the best predictor of a country's peacefulness and overall stability. And we all know that leads to a better standard of living and increased economic prosperity. Understanding the value of acknowledging where our public policies need attention and how gender advisors can help in planning and executing these policies are a first step towards a future where these factors are considered as naturally during planning as logistics currently are. In early military endeavors, there were campaigns that failed because of a lack of understanding of the logistics necessary to wage war. Now, we wouldn't think about planning without it. In future, considering the aspects of gender will become the same, an intuitive part of successful campaign planning, and I believe this next step is the next step in the evolution of military affairs. This leads me to my last point on gender integration. It is ultimately a leadership issue. It is the leadership that is ultimately responsible for creating the working environment where people not only function, but thrive and know that they will be respected by bringing their best skills and attributes forward. The nature of conflict is changing, and being able to function effectively across cultural contexts and in foreign languages is becoming critical to meeting mission goals. We need only look at the successes of our operations across the globe to see how a diverse group was able to see, engage, and interpret what homogeneous teams could not. Diversity is a force multiplier, more today, I wager, than ever before. And if you'll allow me just 2 final points before I end. People first in 2021 means better understanding and applying diversity in all our opportunities of leadership. This is the only way we will continue to be effective in the defense and security realms. And one can argue one of the most important responsibility of leaders is to ensure mission always. And finally, a personal reflection. I believe the future is bright. I see so many incredibly talented, fit, articulate, driven, and professional women in the ranks and in society. I'm humbled by who they are and what they are capable of doing. And when I retired and took the uniform off a couple of months ago, I could relax knowing that there wasn't just one, not two, but many ready and willing to take the senior leadership positions of our Canadian Armed Forces and society in general. And I see it in my own children. Adaptable, tolerant, engaged, linked, networked, true force multipliers and enablers. So in conclusion, let me leave you with this. The society from which we are recruiting is demanding change. We talk about the challenges and differences between our generations and how each is defined. I see this next generation of recruits and I am inspired. Here are people who truly see beyond the gender binaries to the core of who a person is. And this is the group from which we will be drawing our political, military, academic, and civil leaders. I thank them for insisting that we give them the working environment they deserve in exchange for their cutting-edge skills and their agility that we need in our evolving security environment. I hope I have sparked your thinking on embracing a more inclusive role for defense and security, and I believe our future depends on it. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for this discourse. It's really great, and I'm so happy to see Chris online. So that is amazing. Thank you so much. And in general, I think we will have lots of questions right now. We somehow we lost Lima because we don't have Lima with us. We tried to connect, and somehow she's not with us. So unfortunately, it is the case, and in that, I believe we will continue with just question and answers. So I see that we have in the chat so many interesting questions, and also Jerome wrote this, from the trend of this great discussion, is it right to summarize that the best idea of peace is development, and that this development is impossible outside a democratic culture? And I think that is, of course, very good quote you took. Also, we have a question about influence of religion concerning female equity. And I also was thinking about my question, because from Brussels' perspective, we always talk about female participation, socialization process, civil society, how to engage women in policy making, and in general we need this in policy making, and we need to shape policy making. But the question is how we can enhance this cultural change, because I think sometimes it's very difficult for some cultures to enhance this cultural change with respect to female participation, especially in senior leadership positions. For some cultures, it is more difficult than for others. So how we can do it? What will be our solution? And I think we will also have other questions. I believe that right now Jerome also wrote this question about holistic well-being of women is at the center of peace processes and conflict resolution. Inclusive and gendered approach is the right pathway. Why is it difficult for most nations to accept these facts? So maybe we will start with those questions, and then we will continue our discussion, because I believe that we will have all comments and different case studies and amazing leaders are with us, also with your personal approach, your personal perspective, which is so much valued. So we will appreciate your answers or comments.
Vera, I'm assuming that you've asked me to comment on that.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Okay.
Because it is, I think, for all of us, also for all speakers, and I think that those who were before, I believe that case studies were very interesting for me personally, because when I looked at case studies, it was very interesting, different perspective, and I was thinking how we can compare different regions in terms of inclusiveness of women. So I think Susan maybe can give some interesting perspective on this. And I believe we can engage in this debate because we have so much to share, and that is important, to engage, to share, to debate, and to shape policy making. So I see Chris as here with your perspective, from your leadership perspective, and also we have Susan, we have other leaders with us. So please feel free if you would like to comment on those questions.
Sure, thanks, Vera. So, I mean, I have quite a lot to say, as you can only imagine, for those of you who know me. But I'll tear it down to maybe 3 points. And I want to base it on an observation I had when I was in Afghanistan. So I had the opportunity in Afghanistan to work on my own time with some women's groups. And in one of those I had, it was for me, it was an iconic moment when I went to the government house and I got to speak with some of the elected women from the 2010 election, 2009 election, anyways, in that era. And I couldn't understand with my Western brain why there were so many issues that needed to be led by the women who were because they're the only ones interested in it. And I couldn't understand in my Western brain why they weren't all getting together, networking and socializing and working on the issues, as we all do in our own nations. Like, so if there's an issue that's really important and on a political aspect, you know, people that are interested in, they garner together and they encourage each other. And I was told quite bluntly that they didn't know how. So this was, you know, back more than 10 years now. And I couldn't understand that very well until they explained, you know, the Soviets were here and then the Taliban, and then, you know, we were in our homes, we weren't allowed to come out, we were beaten, things were happening to us. There's so much tension and animosity and so much going on that we lost that personal connection to each other. To work issues, to understand the networking, to understand how to socialize certain issues. So as a background, I just want to lay that out there. So in responding to some of the questions, my second point would be, there needs to be a huge impetus to increase the number of, in this case, specifically women, but I would say any other diverse group, you know, as I explained, I mean, there's more than just gender. But groups to come forward and to be involved in defense and security policymaking, whether it's military or civilians, into political landscape, and doing all that. In order to do that, they need to be comfortable that they're going to be taken seriously. And in many countries, that isn't necessarily the case. I mean, even in my own country of Canada, where I think we're actually doing fairly well, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. I mean, all you got to do is read the paper for the last 6 months to realize that people need to address the issues of respect and dignity in the workplace, and they need to be embraced when they're in the workplace. And people with different ideas and innovative ideas, they need to be embraced, and people need to feel comfortable about coming forward with, you know, whatever. So I know that's not a really deep, profound answer to the question, but at its genesis, at almost the groundwork, I mean, there needs to be a feeling of camaraderie and desire to work together in order to create the environment that more and more women or more visible minorities or more whatever will come in and will help facilitate those policy changes. Anyways, a long answer, but that's where I would say it would be worthy of a discussion.
That is definitely true, and I believe that we need this cultural shift and work on cultural shift within different nations, because it is very difficult for many nations to accept it and to embrace it, and also see this difference. And of course, we need to include different stakeholders in this engagement and work together. We have other questions from Libby, I see, because we have very, very good questions. And I think, Libby, if you are with us and you would like to intervene and just ask your question, you can also do it if you are with us. But I can read as well. So here we have, how do we guard against a swing in the other direction, where people are awarded a position based on gender rather than ability? And I think that is a statement. And also, how do we guard against the perception of a swing in the other direction, where we are seeing more women in senior roles in defense, and it is presumed to be entirely linked to their gender? Okay, so that is very tricky question, and maybe we can somehow.
I would be delighted to take that question. Let me be very frank. so I'm going to be very frank, and you may not like the answer, but for years, decades, men has been chosen over women because they were men. I mean, that's the reality of the military, and it's the reality of even many of our Western nations. I mean, let's not excuse the expression, pussyfoot around this issue. So the fact that now people are worried that the pendulum will swing to the other side. First of all, I think it's almost impossible for that to happen because there's just too much imbalance right now in order to be able to let it go that way. But I think draconian steps need to be taken. If you truly and honestly believe, and this is the crux, if you truly and honestly believe that a diverse group and that bringing, mentoring, coaching diverse people up into the senior ranks is important to operational effectiveness, and I think it is, because let's not forget, being inclusive and respectful and dignified is not incongruent with the warrior spirit. There's no incongruency there. So if you honestly believe that, then I think it's time to make some draconian changes. When I was the chief of military personnel, I tell you, I was not popular when I said, for the school year of, I can't remember, I think it was 2017 at Royal Military College, 1 out of every 4 officer cadets coming in must be a woman. We wanted to increase our numbers in the Canadian Armed Forces to 25% women. You can't do that unless you make some draconian changes. You could let it work slowly, it'll take decades, or put in some institutional, spokes in the wheel to make it a little faster. And one of the comments I got from a very seasoned senior officer was, great, we'll have an entire generation pregnant at the same time when we need them. And my answer is, well, I won't tell you what I said, but seriously, if it's important enough, then allow people to come forward, embrace them, bring them up, mentor them, coach them, so that they can come up to the senior ranks. I still believe that they need to be merit-based. You cannot do anything unless you're merit-based. You don't deserve it, then you shouldn't be there. But if 3 of them deserve it, like I told the guys in the recruiting center, if you have 10 people and 8 slots, then and they're all qualified and they're all physically fit, got A's and whatever sciences, whatever, then pick the women first. Why not? Sorry.
Can I chime in there, Chris? Thank you so much for that. Concur all the way. I had an opportunity to ask General Milley, our current chairman, when he was Secretary of the Army, in front of a group of about 100 general officers in the Army. And I asked him, sir, the policy changed in 2015 for the United States, allowing all roles to be open to women. What was your thinking when you decided to do that? And I knew what his thinking was. I decided to ask that because I wanted the majority. There were about 10 female general officers out of the 100 men. So we're about at 10% in the US Army for women general officers. So he said, I'll be happy to take that. I got to tell you, I got a lot of flack for that, but I don't care if you're blue, you got horns. He said, if you can do the job, that's what I care about. But I'm not going to change the standard. The standard will not change. And we saw that with Army Ranger School, where we have over 50 now plus or so. And I'm just throwing that number. I know it's a high number who've graduated. And I had the great opportunity to listen to a lieutenant on a panel like this on women's issues at the 25th Infantry Division. She's a Ranger. Standards did not change. Some of them had to get recycled again before they did it. I mean, these are triathletes who are able to do it. You have to be a triathlete to finish the Ranger School, kind of. But, she said she still would get from people, oh, you probably got it easier, or you had a different standard. And they did not. They shaved their heads, and they were carrying men on their backs, twice their weight. So, it's amazing. I think that perception will always be there because sometimes women have to be perfect, but some men don't. And we know we've all worked for leaders, whether they're men or women, and we've all had terrible leaders. We've all had great leaders, and we know what leadership looks like. It may have a little different spin between men and women, but I think that point that you make about mentorship and leadership, Chris, is so spot on. Naval War College has done extensive research, the U.S. Naval War College, And 2 books have came out of that. Athena Rising: How and Why Men Should Mentor Women is one of them, by Brad Johnson and David Smith. And the other one is Good Guys: Men Being Allies in the Workplace. You know, sometimes there is a hesitancy for senior men to mentor. I've worked for all men, and they've given me opportunities to achieve the roles that I have. But it talks about how you do that and why you should do it for the benefit of our organizations, for the benefit of our nations. And if I can go back quickly to that question about different countries, you know, having done multiple bilateral engagements with different countries, being the U.S. representative from Indo-Pacific Command, I was told by someone who was older from a different generation, said, I don't know how the male general officers in this region are going to take you representing the United States as their female general officer. And I was happy to report that I had no issue. In fact, they saw the flag, they saw what comes behind it and the values that we stand for. And in fact, on a round table where the ambassador, U.S. ambassador was a woman, I was a woman, the Office of Secretary of Defense General, Bobby Shea, Marine Corps General, one of the few, she was the policy, and the interpreter and the assistant secretary for policy, all on one side of the table, happened to be women. It wasn't like we planned it. It just, we were all in these positions. So the other country, very male dominated, no women in that position, and I'll not name the country, but at the end said, maybe we should think about having Lady General. But that was the first time that they looked at the possibility. And so when I went to that country, when I did the rounds, they brought up colonels that they wanted me to meet, that we're grooming this colonel. I mean, they didn't have to answer to me, but they wanted to show and elevate, I have the talent in this country, and these countries have talent. So I feel like we're almost telling them, don't underestimate your women. It's not like Western women are somehow more capable. Your women are just as capable to bring up your nations. That you have talent, use your talent. And that's where my message has been. Thanks.
Thank you so much for this discussion, because it is fascinating, so many topics, and it's true, it's not about gender, it's about skills, abilities, and ability to also to have an impact. I think that we are running only, we have only 15 minutes left, and I suppose that maybe we have some questions to ask our speakers. So I just would like to know if we have such questions, put it in the chat, or you can also ask your question here in the forum, and we can address all these questions. So if we don't have questions in here in the chat box, maybe in that case, I will ask question to all speakers. So I understood that from your perspective, when we looked at gender inclusiveness, socialization, education, training, all of these are important. If you look at certain factors, what would be your important core issue to address in order to change those aspects of gender inclusiveness, apart from education, training, literacy, aspects of cultural shift? What will be the most core important aspect when we take into account all these difficulties that we have with gender inclusiveness?
Is that a question for any one of us?
Yes, for all of you, because I really appreciated all these case studies, and I was thinking I wish to have more best case studies to understand how to address all these problematics. And I think that yes, it will be great if Susan, you can start.
Well, thanks for that great question and your insights and your moderating this discussion. You know, I think I kind of mentioned it, and by the books I mentioned, is that it, and I've said it before, and I'll say it one more time, is that it really has to be men stepping out to the table. We can't, you know, when I did that Women in Defense in Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur, the High Commissioner from the UK, she was awesome. She, at the time that I gave the presentation, she started before me. And largely the audience was women. we had some, male key leaders come in to make some opening remarks, and then they left. And when they left, guess who else left? All the men in the audience with him. And in there were only the women leaders. It was like an exodus. It was amazing. And I don't know that they planned that. That's just the nature of things until you have the men. So she mentioned, the High Commissioner said, I find it, she actually called it out in the audience that we were all talking to each other about what we know. But the voices that need to hear and help us, who are in the positions of power in many of these countries in the Indo-Pacific, have a major role to play. And I feel like they are. Like recently we had a quad, before I retired, we did a quad with Australia, Commander Philippa Hay. She was the first female to run a task force at that Rim of the Pacific exercise. She had countries like Korea, Philippines in her joint sail. And they loved having her there. The admiral who is in charge of all of medical in the southern part of India, and her husband, I think, has responsibility for the eastern part. And then Captain Kawashima from the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. She is a surface warfare officer who has commanded a ship and is a senior leader. And then they have Admiral Kawano in Japan. But a lot of people don't know about these amazing women leaders in defense in countries that are traditionally perceived as not allowing women in these high-level roles. Usually when I tell people that Japan has an admiral and a general, they like, really? Because they don't know. We don't share this information. But I think Prime Minister Abe actually mentioned her in his Womenomics speech. So it's when men speak out and say, look at what Japan has to offer. I want to tell you about these amazing women. Because yes, it has been non-traditional, but here they're breaking through for the benefit of the economy and the strength of Japan. So that's the kind of thing that has to happen in my mind. Thank you.
I'd like to add on to that, Vera, if I can. So I completely agree with what, I completely agree with what Susan just said. It's about encouraging, it's about mentoring, it's about bringing people up, it's about education, it's about dialogues such as these. And it's also about taking risks and normalizing so that you can reach that normalizing behavior at an earlier time than you would otherwise. And, I see in our own instance in Canada, the task force commander for Ukraine was a woman at the same time that the task force commander for, this is terrible, but it's a country in Africa. And at the same time, the CTF was led by a Canadian Commodore, female Commodore. And the Iraq NTI was headed by a female engineer in Iraq. And so, you kind of think, in our own instance, we're trying to normalize that behavior so that people see it more often. And the more you see it, the more you realize it's kind of normal. So we don't have to talk about it anymore. I'm living for that day when my daughters or my granddaughters don't ever have to talk about it anymore because it's just kind of normal behavior. And I think, so countries such as ours, we may be along that line a lot faster, but I think there are countries that could really use some help, which I believe NATO is trying to tackle as well with its partnership with the 40 odd nations, and not to mention the 30 NATO nations, is to reach out and try to help them with their reports, their WPS annual reports, and a whole bunch of other things, so that they can be sort of walking down that same road at the same time. But it really is about dialogue and encouragement and normalized behavior, I think. But it's not easy.
And I'd love to add into that we had a Syrian one-star, a female general, lead the efforts against the rebel fight. And we had our own Delta Force reporting to this woman that when she spoke, everyone listened.
Yeah, however, I think it needs a certain time to get first familiar with, to get acquainted to. This is something of importance. We can't do it within a short period of time, within 5 or 10 years. It needs more time. And the US and Canada, they do have far more time already integrating female soldiers in each and every career path and all the positions than my country, for example. But I think it's a process with a lot of progress in the meantime. I would like to come back to the what you mentioned Fort Benning and the ranger training, Susie, and I think it was Scotty Miller, the commandant of Fort Benning at the time when the first female ranger candidates showed up, and I was in the same position in Germany at that time, so I'm fairly familiar with what was going on and what the ranger training means, and I can assure you the vast majority of male military personnel is not able to complete successfully the ranger training, be it in the US or be it in Germany or be it in France or elsewhere, and only very few women, because at the end of the day it has to do with physical strength, but it has also to do with endurance, endurance. What endurance concerns, female soldiers are tougher, very often tougher than male soldiers. So it is a balance between these two. However, we live also a kind of tradition, and we have our historical examples in our mind, and we start, when we talk about warfare, war fighting, thinking about the medieval times. They had the sword, they had protection, it was heavy, so it needed a certain physical strength to handle this. But as Chris said earlier, nature of conflict is changing. And as we used to say, is we need the right person at the right time, at the right place, regardless sex, regardless gender, regardless identity, regardless religion, or whatever you can take now. So this is something of importance. And given modern and future war, which will happen also in the domain of hybrid, of cyber, of space, we treated a couple of weeks ago. There it is, I think, of absolutely zero importance whether this is a male or a female soldier, general officer, admiral, or politician. Interesting enough, in the political world, female representatives are far more often to be seen already than in the military world, because they have a longer period of time doing this, and they have a longer period of time of tradition and experience and all that. So I think we are well on track. I think this is moving forward. And okay, I share Chris' view that sometimes you need some draconian steps just to prove that things are possible. Because there's a lot of resistance just in terms of credibility, reliability, and all that. So sometimes you have to move forward quite fast, but I think we are doing like this. But this brings me to one of the questions we have, I think Vera has just mentioned. This is a question of religion. And the question how one part, 50% of the population is treated by the other 50%. And honestly, all my experience, my personal experience from all these countries and operational areas where I have been, let's say, able to visit or to be deployed. So Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, Somalia, Mali, even Chad and Central African Republic, they all had serious problems in giving, let's say, similar rights, opportunities, and chances to the female population than in comparison with the male population. And I think this has to do with religion. I'm not sure. I'm not a specialist in this context. But what is your experience? What have you experienced so far? If I may ask this question. Sorry for the lengthy comment, but I think that was necessary to mention it. Thank you.
I'm not sure if that was directed at me, but I'm happy to take a stab at it. It's a really wicked problem, if I can use that phrase, when you take in the aspects of religion in a cultural context. In my experience, it isn't so much religion as it is culture, because religion, whether it's the Quran, the Bible, or others, don't necessarily indicate, as much as I understand it, that one race is less than the other. Anyways, I mean, I won't go into that part, but I believe it's more cultural, a cultural aspect than it is a religious aspect. So what do you do about it? So that's the problem, right? And if you're the Western force going into another country, you cannot, in my humble opinion, enforce your beliefs on other people. And so that creates an environment of frustration and a whole bunch of other things. But what you can do is, through example and education, show them what is possible or what is in the realm of the possibilities. And I believe when we were in Afghanistan, I mean, also in my other free time between midnight and 6 a.m, I worked with a couple of schools, and was one of the schools had boys and girls. Now it's no longer, girls are no longer to go to school, but girls were learning. And when girls learn, when children learn, when mothers allow their children to learn, and when mothers learn, societies, they grow, and things happen. And so through examples and through education and through hopefully showing through those first two that education is important, like the biggie, education is important, I think you can actually make changes. But they take a lot of time, a lot of perseverance, and they must be structured. It must be a really pragmatic approach. My 2 cents.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you so much for all these outstanding remarks, comments, and questions and answers. It was really a privilege to be here with all of you. We are running out of time, unfortunately, because I was thinking to engage more audience about question on the whole of society approach, and also what we can do and how time may help us with this progress and how we can see this progress. But again, I think time is we don't have any time left, unfortunately. We can see this our conference on the podcast if you would like so, and then of course I hope there will be other engagements and such amazing conferences as it was today. And I hope that we will see each other maybe one day. It will be also possibility to see each other in person. But today it was amazing conference with outstanding leaders. Thank you so much for your time and for your engagement and for also all your participation contribution. Thank you so much. It was a privilege to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you next time. See you in the future. Thank you.
Anita, any closing comments from Anita?
Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone who are here. It has been great. And as I said earlier, the speakers are all outstanding speakers, outstanding women, and really influential and visionary people. And thank you for participating. And I think we will have another webinar in October. Actually, there will be 2 webinars in October, and one of them is about communication and crisis response strategies. I think that's it. And there will be women involved in this panel, in this webinar. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you, Dr. Ratsi Borinska and all participants, and thank you so much for coming.
Just one last remark. I just received a message from Lima. She apologizes, but obviously she's completely absorbed by other duties, and I think she made, as well as I did earlier, a mistake in the time zone differences. So this might have happened. So given the global approach we have with our APSI forum, we must take extra care of the question, when is exactly what happening and where exactly. So this is something which happens, but I can assure you we will work on that. So, but Lima is okay. This is the good news. Okay. So thank you again. It was a pleasure and a privilege to be here, Vera. Thank you very much for that, Anita. Excellent, great.
Excuse me.
Illuminating.
Sorry to
Someone
interrupt you. I'll also make acknowledgement of Major Lorraine actually drove 40 minutes to get home to participate in this event. She was thrown initially by the time zones. NATO can't use Chrome, so she comes home and now she's having problems with the sound. The same issues as Christine was initially having problems with. So, yeah, I'm not sure she can even hear the statement, but I feel so sorry for Lorraine. And hopefully we can get her the podcast, and perhaps if she would desire, ask questions to Susie, ask questions to Chris and Libby if she wants to have follow-up questions. And we just so sorry, but I guess sometimes these things happen, and we'll just have to double our efforts to make sure that people don't get caught out in the future.
I hate to say goodbye to everyone.
Thank you,
We hope
Anita.
to see you
Goodbye.
again. Follow our website. Come back to our next webinars. We have so many. Follow our website, please. We have so many coming up.
Just Lorraine, are you able to hear us? Sounds like you just popped up.
Is Lorraine there? I know we could see her there.
Yeah. The joys of global communication. Just a good thing the earth isn't flat.
We're still there with her again.
Yeah,
Well,
she could
just a
see us.
second,
She couldn't
she's
hear us
trying to open
before.
her mic.
Yeah.
Is she trying to speak? No. Up. Oh, she's in the task right there. I am good, she said. Okay. We still have her right there. She's in the text box. She said, I am good. Oddly, this was weird for all the issues we had with Jitsi, because we've always had some success with Jitsi. I have sound and image now. Okay.
Oh dear.
Yeah, for everyone else out there, yeah, thanks from Dr. Abbott. We'll have this webinar on podcast soon. Go to our site.
Greetings, Major Lorraine. I understand you can hear us now. We just wish to offer you a most humble apology about how things have worked out for you this morning. I've sent a detailed email. Firstly, sorry for the mix-up with the time zones. And obviously, as I indicated, we had a reduced schedule from originally how we intended to run this webinar. Also, unfortunately, Lima was not able to join us. So we just thank you so much for all the effort that you made to drive home to even join us today. And we're sorry for the initial sound problems you may have had. All I can say in consolidation, this has been recorded. And if you have further questions that you specifically want to ask our talent, whether Susie, Christine, Libby, we're here to help. And yeah, we're just so sorry for the mix-ups, because we appreciate as a major working for NATO that we appreciate you wanting to take interest in us and in the subject. And these things happen sometimes, and I'm sorry that we've messed up your day. I'll own that, and just hope that we can work together more in the future. And thank you again so much for our team.
Okay, this is something we have to take into account. Lima, for example, she wrote, I think there was a misunderstanding. It is still September 29th. And then I answered, okay, don't worry. And she said, my understanding, it was the 30th, which is tomorrow on my calendar. I apologize for any inconvenience. I'm still quoting Lima. As I am at the refugee camp and do not have access to internet all the time, my understanding was the panel discussion is on 30th of September. And I answered, don't worry, Lima, we have these different time zones. In New Zealand, it's September 30. In Germany, it's September 29. So we have to take very much care of time and where and when exactly. I made the same mistake today because I didn't realize and didn't keep in mind that there was again a time change somewhere in the world, obviously, which leads to the start 1 hour earlier than I expected.
Me too, actually, because it's good that Anita wrote me, because I was thinking that it will be at 10 in the evening, and Anita wrote me it's 9, and
And this is the reason why I was so grateful that Sergeant Major Anthony called me and said, hey, General, what's up? This is why you need to have a battle buddy taking care of you. Hey, Sergeant Major, that was the best call you did today, I'm pretty sure. Because I was sitting there completely relaxed, waiting, and I thought, well, within 1 hour time we will start, and I'm glad to have this opportunity, and blah, blah. And oops.
I was going to be in the same position because it was a 2-hour time difference to Hawaii. And now it's in the day of course, this is now the 29th for us, not the 30th, but it was 2 hours a couple of weeks ago. So last time we spoke, it was a 2-hour time difference. And that's why last night, if you saw me kind of send that one to Anita, what time is it in New Zealand right now? And that's when I kind of went, oh man, it's an hour difference, because I would have been in the same boat.
Yeah. Okay. No. Luckily, you called me.
Of course. No. I can't do anything without you.
I am. This was pretty interesting.
Vera, thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, it was a bit of improvisation from my side, so I'm sorry if it was just a bit of improvisation, because I was thinking that it was one hour change, but it was really interesting debate, and I like to engage more in debate than structure conversation when people read their notes. I like when people discuss, when you can ask questions, when you can intervene, when you can actually sometimes put more into discussion. It's more fascinating than just read notes and PowerPoints.
What a great point, because oftentimes, in these audience, it's usually like-minded groupthink for everyone that's there. And of course, people are going to come with the same ideas, the same vision, the same beliefs. It's kind of cool if we could, get those outliers in there, the ones that are on the fringe that are still kind of, they're not buying into this. And I'm not saying we try to convert them, no, but just even to hear their diversity of thought. So yeah, it's kind of unique when you do these things, because you don't have the outliers coming in, and it'd be cool if we can get some of the outliers and maybe convert them in the process. But
this is a very good idea. Yeah, we should try to do this. Okay, I think one lesson learned from today or tonight is 2 hours are by far not enough to treat such a difficult and delicate subject as we had today. We just can put a small spotlight on a point here and on another point there, but it is pretty difficult to go deeper into the subject within 2 hours. And if we had Lima present, we would have had another lecture, and this would have cut our discussion time and question and answer and comments and all that to almost zero, I must say. So the question is indeed, do we keep this strict 2-hour time frame, or do we open it to 3 hours, depending on the number of speakers? with the risk that we have an extended discussion, or on the other side with the risk that we have zero discussion, which is not funny. So we must give the audience the opportunity to dive in and to ask questions and to share their own experience, of course.
Yeah. General, what a great point. And Vera, if you're interested, I mean, this is where it'd almost be great if we had a panel discussion, of course, bringing back Susie and Chris back to a panel, but also getting, if we get Lima, but others like, women from Bangladesh. I'd really be interested in hearing a perspective of, we can get someone from Japan, someone from Korea, someone from Taiwan, because this is the people that we've been attracting to our webinars right now, or our forums. And again, actually have a panel discussion, but not necessarily with them presenting, but the audience addressing the panel. So if we had a virtual panel, I mean, and again, too, that goes to the general's point, 3 hours. But if we had a virtual panel with some of the people that are pushing these ideas, people from the UN, but again, the audience, and we'd have to prep it beforehand and really enforcing that, like, hey, audience, get your questions now. Get ready to pose them now, and sort of get that intellectual discourse or debate going.
Engagement is better when you engage with the audience and you have debate. It's more interesting to follow than when you have linear presentations. But sometimes linear presentations are good with PowerPoints when we have some topical issues to address. But engagement with audience is always better when you have debate, when you have discussion, when you have more tricky questions to answer. And I think it is more interesting from the audience perspective.
Yeah, the general and I, we have funny stories about people that put PowerPoints up. So we're kind of PowerPoint... afraid. I don't know. Yeah, we see what happens with PowerPoints sometimes. It goes a little astray.
We have had experiences, yes. More than enough said already. No, it was pretty interesting, fascinating subject. Of course, it is something which fuels emotion quite rapidly and frequently, because it is very much linked to career chances, and honestly, we have to take it as it is, and many male claim to be in favor of, let's say, gender equity and things like that, but I have little confidence in the reliability and credibility of what is said very, very frequently. And we can see it in Afghanistan, which might be a very bad example now, but what is the added value for the male population in this area, in this culture, in this context, when their women start to have their own opinion and their own career ideas? Isn't it much easier and much comfortable on the short term for them to have a personal slave at home? It is a very nasty picture which I'm presenting now, but I fear that deep inside many male, this is kind of thinking which is not beyond imagination.
Yeah. It's funny, when I was still in uniform and I had two absolutely incredible women on my staff, they're just geniuses in their field. And I noticed, though, what I'd start to do, it would depend on the crowd that we were addressing. And I'd usually have them address the crowd, but I used to make them go in civilian attire initially. And if the military in the crowd didn't know they were in the military and they were in civilian attire and they would address the crowd, I used to watch the body language. People would listen. The next day, I'd make them show up in uniform, and I'd watch the reaction from the crowd. Like, I was just briefed by an enlisted woman on this. And that's when I would try to get up there and I go, you see, this is where the perceptive change is not occurring. You thought she was a duty expert in this particular field when you saw her dressed like this. The next day you see her as a master sergeant in the Air Force, and you're like, I just listened to a master sergeant. So I used to do some things very subtly to the crowd, especially in some of the more Muslim-dominated militaries. So when I addressed the crowd saying Indonesia or Bangladesh, I would do that careful setup. And subtly it would start to work, but I was just trying to change this perceptive change that the brilliance is there, but you're already being perceptive because you saw a uniform, you saw a lower ranking person, you didn't think they had anything to offer. And trying to say, hey, look, you have these women in your ranks. By not using their voice, you're just going to be, ineffective as a military.
Yeah, good, great experience. Yeah, great experience. Wonderful. Vera, are you happy with the evening? Yeah, for us it's the evening. Yeah, of course.
For me, it was just interesting to participate. I actually, it was improvisation. If Anita didn't write me, it's not like you need to come immediately. I said, oh, really? Because I was thinking it is in 1 hour and so on, and it was just improvisation. But again, it was very interesting. For me, Susie gave a lot of information as case studies, and it was very good because it was practical information, and I like those case study a lot. From substance, it was very good. And Chris, of course, it's very always very good. I know Chris from NATO Defense College, so brilliant leader and a fascinating topic, and how she also put all these important core aspects, inclusiveness and gender aspect and socialization, so on. So very good. Of course, I think time was a bit. It was time constrained because I could engage more into conversation about cultural shape, religion, role of religion in culture, strategic communication, how we can enhance this debate. I'm also very much interested right now because of my research on behavior wars and how we can, for example, change this whole of society approach and engage women in society and more in terms of crisis management and information when we look at low intensity wars and so on. So lots of questions, but I couldn't just ask them and put in a chat because of time constraint. So Anita was writing me on mobile, we don't have time, and we need just to conclude and say that's it. I was like, okay, then we need to say that we don't have time. But I think it was good conversation, a bit spontaneous, with some not really structured as it should be at the beginning, I suppose, but at the end it was okay. We didn't have Lima. I think with Lima it would be definitely 3 hours for me, for sure. And I think in general it was a very good debate at the end, but just starting, not. But maybe next time there will be more possibility to engage with audience or do differently, or it's always lessons learned from every experience. So.
Yeah. I'm very happy. I'm very happy what happened today, and I think if we take it as an appetizer to dive more deeply into the subject on a more individual way, then it's okay. We cannot treat such a huge and very important subject within such a short period of time. That's physically impossible, and it doesn't matter. It was an excellent webinar, and it was. I think it was well organized. And if you say it was a bit chaotic, I think no, it was authentic. Yes, that's my feeling. Yeah, and luckily we are not on the academy proving that we are able to make a structured I don't know what panel or discussion whatsoever. So we have made this numerous times, and we are able to. So
Yeah.
this is not the point. And we are limited with PowerPoint slides, and we are limited in time, and we have to respect the seconds and all that. We learn all that during our academy times. That's not the point. What we need now is authenticity and credibility and reliability of what has been said. And I think this was perfect for me today. So I love that. Okay. Here we are.
We have intellectual freedom, and some of us don't have to worry about tenure, so we're okay with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Thanks a lot. And
Thank you
Touch
so
Maker, thanks again for calling me.
No.
Phew. Okay, I must admit I must be more careful in preparing, which I used to do, but I think I was so familiar now, and I know everything. Nothing, See,
like I said, generally, like I said, everyone asks me what is one of the things I miss most about active duty, and I said, God, I miss my executive administrators. God, do I miss the EAs? Oh, do I miss them? I always say first, I do miss the people, but secondly, what I miss the most was that team of EAs that kept me I'm on my own now.
Wonderful. Okay, excellent.
That's why I got your back. But
Okay.
Vera, it's so nice to meet you, though. I mean, this is really cool, and I'm really hoping, Vera, you could join us again on a bunch of these other things. Especially coming from, that's the thing is that we're trying to grow where APSI is just not the Indo-Pacific; it's the whole world. And you coming in from Belgium is just incredible. So that's why wow, thank you so much. Bon chance. It was just awesome.
Thank you so much. And again, if there are more debates or more topics where I'm more engaged into substance, because again, I work on right now on resilience and questions of behavior wars, Russia, Eastern Europe, questions about different domains, and also hybrid and so on. So for me, it's my topics, European Union, NATO cooperation, information warfare, and so on. So I would love to participate. Every time when I go to different, will be next week Warsaw Security Forum, before Zagreb Security Forum, always a very great audience and great community, security community. So I love all these debates. I like the spontaneity aspect a lot. What I like more structured, because it's for me, it's my because I prefer to give short remarks after every, because I had to normally for me I was thinking that I need to give short remarks after every conversation, and then at the end. So for me it was just my point that I didn't do it because of time, and for me it was a bit chaotic. So it was addressed to me as my I think negative point today, because I didn't. I like when everything is structured and well done from my side. But it was really very interesting. And if there are any debates or any topics where I can be engaged in, for me it's a pleasure, because I love such events, and I love to participate as a moderator, or of course I can give lots of presentations as well. It's of course, and Anita always tells me, we have this. Maybe you can come to this conversation. So for me, it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully, I mean, December we were supposed to be together physically, but hopefully next spring we're together physically. So, and if you could come out to New Zealand, that would be absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, that would be great. But I think in December it's physically impossible. It is. They closed the border. They will reopen the border, I think, early next year, and then it will need again a certain period of time to get it open for anybody or for everybody. So this is not very likely that this will happen on Christmas or before Christmas this year. Most likely in spring, but I hope guaranteed within 1 year time. Okay, but we will see. We will do it anyway. And whether it's 3 months earlier or later, doesn't matter. We have our webinars, we have our virtual attendance, and so this is at least something.
Inshallah.
Okay.
All right.
Have a
Good night
wonderful-
to you. Good night to you too.
Yeah. Okay, we go to bed. Good night, and you have a wonderful day, Sergeant Major.
Look forward to seeing you guys again.
Bye.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. Kia ora.
Guten Tag.
Okay.
Au revoir.
And see you then. Bye bye. Have a good night. Ciao.